Welcome to Penn State Dickinson Law's Profiles in Leadership series. My name is Daryl Lim. I'm the H. Laddie Montauk Junior Chair and Associate Dean for Research and Innovation at the Law School. This series offers an unparalleled opportunity to glean insights from top leaders in their respective fields. In each episode, we invite these leaders to reflect on their journeys and share skills, core values, and qualities that make them the leaders they are today. We're very pleased to welcome Katie Moussouris, founder and CEO of Luta Security. She's been featured in Forbes as one of the world's top 50 women in tech and America's top 50 women in tech. She's advised several governments and large organizations around the world and has spoken on security research, incident response, vulnerability disclosure, and bug bounties. While at Microsoft, she started Microsoft Vulnerability Research, which formalized multi-party vulnerability and supply chain vulnerability coordination across hardware and software. She's launched Microsoft's first bounty program. She's worked with the Department of Defense, where she led the launch of the US government's first bug bounty program, Hack the Pentagon. She's worked with the State Department to change the export control language to include technical exemptions for vulnerability disclosure and incident response. She's a member of NIST's Information Security and Privacy Advisory Board and a cybersecurity fellow at New America and the National Security Institute. She's a visiting scholar, has been a visiting scholar at MIT Sloan School, a Harvard Belfer affiliate, and an advisor to the Center for Democracy and Technology. She's also the founder of Pay Equity Now Foundation, and through the foundation, she established the Manglona Lab for Gender and Economic Equity at Penn State Law. And most recently, she was the commencement speaker at the College of Information Sciences and Technology. Welcome.
Thank you, Daryl. Thank you so much for having me. This is quite an honor.
Let's start with your commencement speech. Take us back to May 4th. You ended your post with May the 4th be with you. Reflect on that day and some of your takeaways.
Well, for Star Wars fans, that should have been no surprise. That was Star Wars Day. And May the 4th be with you, would be the classic sign off for that day. So I was happy to be able to incorporate that little bit into my speech. The speech really, it was an honor of a lifetime to be invited to give that speech. It was, I was looking to reflect on not only the parallels of my own career, kind of growing up at the dawn of the internet era where technology was changing and shaping the future, but also, drawing that parallel with where we are right now in terms of technology and the advancements brought by AI. And artificial intelligence, can be used as is and be trained, with biased data and biased algorithms, or we can make some deliberate choices to not live with the biases that have grown up around the human experience so far. And so I introduced the concept of radical pay transparency, pay equity initiative that I'll be working with Penn State IST on as a pilot program this fall, and hopefully we'll get to expand that program. The program is basically inviting the recent graduates back to Penn State to share with their peers, with each other, and with the upcoming graduates for next year, what their compensation packages look like, what are their job offers looking like. So not only to shine the light on what they're being offered to make sure their pay packages are fair, but to give the newer graduates an idea of what the job market is like in real time. So I think that's going to do a lot to basically drive away the shadows around pay inequity and help us achieve pay equity in our lifetime.
Why is that important to you?
I think it should be important to everyone. Women as a group of all races, we're not really slated in the current trajectory to achieve pay equity in any of our lifetimes. If we're adults, white women aren't going to catch up with white men in terms of pay for 50 plus years. That's 50. So for anyone who's thinking pay equity is right around the corner, it's math says something different. And then for all races and Black women especially, Black women are looking at 200 plus years at current pay rates to achieve pay equity with white men. So unless we make a deliberate change, this is not going to change in our lifetime.
And of all places, you picked Penn State. Why Penn State?
Well, actually, I am friends with one of your law professors at Penn State Law, and it's Dr. Andrea Matwishin, and she and I have worked on cyber policy law together and getting important initiatives and exemptions. She's actually one of my legal heroes, and she runs the technology pilot lab at Penn State Law. So when I was looking for a place to donate to this issue of pay equity and the law that's very important to me. I asked her for a recommendation and she said, donate it to Penn State.
So you're all about bug bounties. I'm sure you do more than bug bounties, but in looking at many of the talks you've given, that seems to have been the keyword that has come up. Uh, Tell us how you got into bug bounty hunting.
Well, so for the audience, I think it probably makes sense for me to describe what a bug bounty actually is. So you've heard the TSA say, if you see something, say something. Well, if you see a security bug, it's a good idea to report it to get it fixed. That in and of itself is not a bug bounty. That's called a vulnerability disclosure program because you are disclosing a security vulnerability to an organization to get it fixed. A bug bounty is simply tacking on a cash reward. So it's just a catchier way to say, if you see something, say something, and we'll pay you for it. I started Microsoft's very first bug bounties 11 years ago in 2013. And at the time, they were not that common. Fast forward a few more years, and the Pentagon had become interested in why the largest software company in the world who patches a lot of bugs every Patch Tuesday, was suddenly starting to pay for security vulnerabilities that they had previously gotten reported to them for free by the security research community. And so when the Pentagon asked me to explain it to them, I spent a few years laying the groundwork for what became Hack the Pentagon. And that was the very first program where the US government invited friendly hackers to test its security defenses. And in exchange, they would pay them some cash rewards. So in and of itself, do these programs, make you more secure? Certainly more secure than you would have been if you hadn't heard about these bugs. But can they secure you on your own without your own due diligence? No, not at all. It would be like asking your house to be painted one brushstroke at a time by a bunch of strangers. You're not going to get the coverage and professionality that you need. So you need to employ professional painters or professional security professionals, people internally to your organization to try and prevent as many of those bugs as possible. And the bug bounty program is supposed to be to catch the spots that you missed.
So when you dealt with the government, and in particular the Department of Defense, was it a different experience from your other client experiences, uh, in terms of whether it's NDA or the culture or what you had experienced?
Well, I didn't have to sign any NDAs because I was giving them information, not the other way around in a lot of those cases. It was a different experience. It's with a lot of things with the government, not just ours, but a lot of them, there's a lot of preamble to sudden action. And that is what it felt like getting ready for Hack the Pentagon. There were several years of me just kind of coming and doing friendly meetings, educational meetings, answering questions that they had, helping them think through the logistics of doing something like this. And when it was getting ready to really happen, I remember there was somebody from a three-letter agency in one of the meetings, and he said, well, I think it's a bad idea. I think you're opening up a can of worms, and we're certainly not going to call it Hack the Pentagon. Well, it was called Hack the Pentagon, and it did open up a can of worms, but a good can of worms. And now it's actually federally required for all federal agencies, civilian as well, to run vulnerability disclosure programs. They're not paying cash rewards. They're not required to pay cash, but they are required to have an ability to learn about security reports from the outside. And in exchange, they say, if you follow these rules and don't try to maliciously exploit our systems, but you tell us about it, as soon as possible, we won't take legal action against you. And that little piece in terms of the law, in the intersection, we are on a law podcast here, the intersection of the legality of hacking systems that don't belong to you, as long as your intent is to get those vulnerabilities fixed. That was the piece that I think was, the most important to get right, because I don't know if you followed in the news, the federal government does go after nation state hackers by name in certain cases. Even though they're working for a foreign government's military, they will actually indict individuals in foreign hacking activities, involved in foreign hacking activities. And that legalese that's on the bug bounty page or the vulnerability disclosure page, that has to actually be able to extend an olive branch to the friendly hackers while still preserving the legal ability to go after those who are doing malicious hacking. And that is an important line to be able to define.
And are you happy with how the line has been drawn and implemented?
Well, I'm happy with so many organizations wanting to offer, they often will call it safe harbor. It's a false kind of use of the term safe harbor, and I'll get into that in just a moment. I do think it's been a good effort, because the number one thing you want to do when you're dealing with friendly hackers is you want to leave as open door policy as possible. You want to learn about as many of these security holes that they find as possible, and not discourage them by overly prohibitive or scary sounding legal language, right? So you want to make it as plain language as possible. And I think that effort has come a long way. I remember setting up the very first Hack the Pentagon, and they wanted all the legalese at the top before you even got to the technical, scope and parameters of what was allowed and what wasn't allowed that hackers would understand. And I just suggested that they maybe move that to the bottom. It's still there, but if you start with that, you may scare away a lot of good researchers before they kind of get up the courage to come forward. So I like that part of it, that has gotten better, and the intent on both sides is really good. And if you'll indulge me, the term safe harbor, I am not a lawyer, but I have seen that term used and sort of misused in the context of vulnerability disclosure. And the reason it's misused is that you can't actually grant safe harbor when systems are so interconnected and there's a lot of supply chain components that you yourself cannot authorize someone to hack, right? Your application or your website may be running a lot of third-party software, a lot of third-party libraries. And if you're saying hack everything that is running on this website, and I won't sue you, for example, you can't make that guarantee that a third party won't bring that legal action, because it's not all your software. This comes into play especially around car manufacturers. If you think about it, they are just hardware boxes with a lot of software and hardware integrations. So it's very difficult, to use that term safe harbor in a legal sense that's accurate. And that's something that, I definitely have worked with a lot of organizations and governments to get that wording right.
Well, I'm glad you're mentioning here. I've not yet heard you mention it on any of the other videos you've spoken at on YouTube. So we can say you heard it here first.
That's right. Well, I mean, this is a law podcast, so I felt like, if any audience is going to indulge me in sort of the nuances of the term safe harbor as it's used in bug bounties, this was the place to do it.
Well, you did talk about another set of laws, software liabilities laws, and you had mentioned that they don't go far enough in penalizing software companies who are negligent in their cybersecurity practices. Can you talk a little bit about that and if things have moved forward today?
Well, I think it's interesting. So I don't know if you recently saw last week at the RSA conference, CISA just rolled out a software a pledge to build software secure by design, right? And they had a lot of companies signing this pledge. And it's an interesting thing because it's a self-attestation from these companies saying we will build software as securely as we can by design from the beginning. And there's nothing new about that idea. So back to what you were saying about software liability, I think we're beginning to see the groundwork for laying down where people are attesting to a certain number of security practices, and eventually they will be, the bets will be called, right? And I don't know how that is actually going to play out in the real world, but certainly it was not without risk that those companies signed that pledge last week. They are definitely committing to certain practices, and they're committing to being evaluated against those promises at some point later in time. Now, which regulatory body will take the lead on that? I don't know. We've already seen legal action from the FTC against organizations that have claimed to be protecting consumers, for example, and failed to respond to bug reports from their bug bounty or vulnerability disclosure program. They kind of took the bug and then said, yep, we'll fix it. And then years later, it was exploited. And the FTC has successfully sued and fined and taken legal action against some of those companies that made those claims. So what I am anticipating, is that there will probably be a lot of misapplications of some of the more simplistic ideas about what it means to build secure software. So, for example, a lot of people mistake finding a lot of bugs as a sign of insecure software, right? It's like number of bugs equals insecure software. Well, what if that just means that the software that doesn't have a lot of bugs found, just that nobody's looked at it, right? So it's very difficult to find an accurate way to measure the amount of security that has been, built into a particular product, unless you're looking at more deeper metrics than most organizations are even counting right now. And I'll just wrap up this part with saying that, it's not necessarily the number of vulnerabilities that are found compared to, one piece of software compared to somebody else's piece of software. It's actually the number of vulnerabilities found going down over time in your own software and the complexity of those vulnerabilities going up. And that is not something that is typically measured. To me, if software liability were to, be enforced fairly, it would be enforced against some sort of a maturity measure. And that is not something that's being currently, really looked at or measured at all right now.
Well, thanks for sharing that. So, one thing that struck me, and I'll share two, but here's one first. In listening to the interviews you have given, is that you seem to have really thought through the issues. And if one were to look at a transcript of the videos where you've given interviews, it almost reads like an article. How do you think through these issues? Take us behind the scenes in that thought process, how you keep up with developments, and form an opinion on what's going on.
So I mentioned that I started Microsoft's Bug Bounties 11 years ago. That journey actually started 14 years ago in 2010. And I bring this up as an answer to your question because in that 3-year period between 2010 and the launch of the actual Microsoft Bug Bounty programs in 2013, boy, did I have to go through a lot of research. So it was internal research looking at data about how the bugs were being reported for free at the time to Microsoft, and for pay to what were called third-party brokers. There were defensive brokers that would give the bugs to Microsoft for free on the back end. They would pay for the bugs, up front, and they'd give them for free to Microsoft on the back end. And their business model was, writing defensive software. So they would have, antivirus and IDS software that would they would create signatures based on these vulnerabilities that they bought. But they were the defensive bug brokers, right? And then there were the offense bug brokers. You've heard of, multi-million-dollar deals where offensive parties will buy bugs and exploits for use offensively, and they'll resell them to governments and in some cases criminals. And these markets were happening, at the time. Certainly they had been, at least 5 years old at the time, so there was a lot to study. So I actually ended up doing a lot of game theory, economic theory, some studies, and that was, you mentioned at the beginning in my bio, collaborations that I had done with MIT Sloan School and Harvard Kennedy School. Those were some of the deep dives into the vulnerability and exploit marketplace and how we could potentially shift the levers such that we could advantage defenders. And was the answer paying more for bugs? Could you outbid the offense market? The answer is no. You cannot outbid the offense market. And I will tell you, a lot of people misunderstand this and they think, well, if you don't pay a certain amount, you're gonna, the all bug hunters will just sell to the highest bidder. Well, if you think about it, we don't sell our labor to the highest bidder. Like, we have ethics, each of us as individual workers. Bug hunters are exactly the same. It's a cross section of humanity, right? So you're not necessarily going to sell to someone who you believe might hurt your own country. You're not necessarily going to sell to the highest bidder to somebody that you believe is going to help a regime that is abusing human rights of its people. So it's not one-to-one correlation of money equals that's where the bug is going to go. Anyway, you asked how, what's the thought process? It was years of thinking through this problem and working with some economists and behavioral scientists and everything to come up with appropriate bounty amounts and appropriate non-monetary incentives, things that money can't buy, that you're able to use to work with security researchers who, they don't want to necessarily do their work for free. Why should they? It's a skilled labor. But they definitely don't want the only option to them to be this offense market where their bug will be used to attack people. So you have a lot of room to play in there. And, how did I come up with all of these things? Just, hard work, data, and studying and working with some great minds.
And how do you meet these great minds? They don't just all sit around in a bar, you go in and you just make those connections. And they seem to be in quite different spheres of activity, and yet you've made these different connections and brought them together. How did that take place?
Well, I would say, when I was working at Microsoft, the first hurdle to be able to access, some of these other great minds outside of Microsoft was I had to convince the executives inside of Microsoft that this was a good idea. They were, getting all of these bug reports for free. And I had to show them ways that they could focus those free eyeballs that were staring everywhere at every product and every version. One of the first bug bounties I got Microsoft to agree to was to do one at the very beginning of the Internet Explorer browser beta period, right? I used to be able to say IE beta and people would understand what I was talking about, but this browser has been retired for a while, that version of the browser. So the point was they were getting all these bugs for free, but they were getting them after the beta period was closed because the only incentive was you would get your name as a thank you in a Microsoft security bulletin. So if it only affected the very latest beta software and none of the older versions, researchers who were typically reporting for free were actually reporting for credit. And they would wait until that moment in time, kind of the worst time to hear about a bug. So convincing the internal Microsoft executives of the advantage of, look, if you put an incentive, little cash reward, but put their name in lights, if they report as early in the beta period as possible, you're aligning their goals with Microsoft's goals, with the customer's goals. It's a triple win all around. So once I did that and convinced them, of not only that bug bounty, but also the very first bug bounty that wasn't for individual bugs, but for exploitation techniques. The techniques that would, defeat all of the protections that sit like a layer, a security blanket, as it were, across the whole operating system and affected not just Microsoft products, but every product that ran on Microsoft. If there were new ways to poke holes in that shield, that's more important than the individual bugs you would use, at the tip of the spear to poke holes through, right? The exploitation technique was more important. So step one, convince the Microsoft executives that these were better ideas than just waiting to see who happened to stumble across a bug and decide to give it to Microsoft for free. That ability to direct the researchers using cash rewards and timing. And then once I was starting to speak about this externally, I remember I had been substituted in to speak about these programs because a mentor of mine at Microsoft, an executive there, Steve Lipner, who's still a good friend, and we serve on one of the federal advisory boards that I serve on. He's the chair, so we're still good friends and colleagues. But he had been asked to speak at a joint symposium between Harvard, Belfer, and MIT Sloan School. And he said, I am not the authority on this, Katie is. And so he pushed me out there, and I gave my talk and showed the graphs and explained how, what the thinking was going into this. And sitting in that audience was not only my future research collaborators, across both schools, but someone from the Office of the Secretary of Defense at the Pentagon.
Why do you put so much time and effort into public communication?
That's a funny question. It's like I think they have a term for me now that I didn't know about, and they call us ambiverts. We're actually introverts who kind of hate this, but when we get engaged and we're talking about something that we're really interested in, we become very extroverted. And everyone who's seen me speak has said, "Oh, you seem so comfortable," and I'm like, "You have no idea what's going on here."
What is
But
going on there?
yeah, I mean, I think it's honestly that I am passionate about this, right? So it's something that I find easy to talk about. And obviously I've spent more than a decade of my career thinking about it. And I do like the fact that almost everyone I talk to about this subject, even people who have been security experts for a long time, I always feel like they've learned something from what I've said that they hadn't thought about before, that there's more depth to this subject. And so that inspires me to get through my introvert ways and spread the word.
So, have people also told you that in addition to being a content expert, you're also really funny when you give presentations? Uh, Tell us, is that you? Is that a technique that you weave into your presentations? And boy, people should look at the slides that you use because you talk about cybersecurity, but all, many of those slides are things that people could look at and they would just laugh because they're so humorous.
Honestly, it's just my sense of humor. So I think I got one of the best compliments. Actually, it was from that audience member that I was telling you about who was working in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, Dr. Michael Sulmeyer. About a decade ago, I was, written up in InfoSec magazine as, a top woman in cyber, and they were getting quotes from people who had worked with me. And he said, I think probably the nicest professional compliment I've ever had, which was, Katie's great to work with because she takes her work very seriously, but she doesn't take herself very seriously. And so I really appreciated that because I do have a sense of humor, and it just comes through. And quite frankly, it makes it easier for me to get through those presentations if I've got jokes, if I've got things to lighten the mood.
So, take us back to when you were 8, and if you like a little bit before, uh, that's when you talk about getting your first computer. You taught yourself basic, but what were the things around you that facilitated both that interest and that ability to do what you did?
Well, my mom was a scientist, so she was a native Pacific Islander, Chamorro, specifically from the Mariana Islands. And she had gotten a scholarship to come to the mainland and study biochemistry. And she was a biochemist first, and then later a pioneer in the field of fertility work. So she became a reproductive endocrinologist. So back then, science wasn't, done on computers as much as, they are now. That was the very beginning of the modern computing age. But my mom, as a scientist, knew that this was going to be important. And, she was a single mom, but she managed to buy me a Commodore 64. And I thought it was for playing games. I thought it was, it came with Pac-Man. And so I'm playing Pac-Man and I'm asking her, can we buy some more games? And she's like, oh, that thing was very expensive. You're going to have to learn how to play with it here. And she hands me the basic programming manual that came with the Commodore 64. So we have a saying, RTFM, read the effing manual. I won't swear on this podcast, but my mom RTFM'd me. She just handed me the manual and said, like, figure it out. And I mentioned that, I was introverted and shy. I didn't have anyone to really talk to about this. So I was writing games for myself, on this computer and spending a lot of time with it. And that is the hobby that started, my whole career.
And you never look back.
What's that?
And you never look back.
I never look back except with gratitude.
Yeah. So in 2013, your hair was brown.
It was. Yeah.
And
Global warming. This is
global
what
warming.
happens. Yeah. No, it's real.
Is it part of branding? Is it part of being a hacker? Tell us what went into that choice.
So it started out, I had previously had, little streaks of blue in my hair that had been my color, like a streak of blue here or there, but it was subtle. And I think early 2016, I decided to do an all over hair color. And at first it was actually purple. It was a deep purple. At the time of Hack the Pentagon, my hair was purple. And that was sort of a gateway color. And I remember it was difficult to maintain. And a stylist who was refreshing my hair said, let me just try something. Let's just put some pink highlights on top. I said, no, 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 no. I don't like pink. Pink is not my color. I'm much more goth, and everything. And no, I go with the dark colors. And she's like, let me just try it. If you don't like it, I'll put purple all through. So she did it. And I was like, this isn't bad. And it was easier to maintain. So it was, at first, it became sort of this practical transition. And then eventually it became associated with my brand, Luta Security. And unlike any other cybersecurity company out there whose motifs are typically very warlike and shields and swords and, a
You have
lot
a
of
hibiscus.
yeah, we've got a hibiscus, and we also have an homage to my Chamorro roots. The T in Luta Security in our logo is a laddie stone, and these were these stone pillars that ancient Chamorros used to build their homes on, to protect them from flooding and whatnot. So yeah, so that's a little bit about our logo and the very hot pink color that has now become synonymous with Luta Security.
And so when your staff go out, do they all have the same color of hairdo as you? No,
No,
it's
I
not a
may
job
have
requirement.
no, it's not. I remember there was a security company that they didn't require employees to get the logo tattooed on them, but they managed to like Jedi a bunch of the folks to get the logos tattooed. We do not require hair color changes or tattoos at Luta Security. We do have some pretty cool t-shirts that everybody loves though. They're super soft. They're gray with the Luta logo right there. So they're,
Where can we get one?
we can send you one. We can send you one.
Okay, good. I'll wear it with pride.
That's right.
Tell us about Luta Security. How did the idea of founding it come about? What does your job as founder and CEO look like? And what some of the future plans you have for Luta?
Well, I started it right after launching Hack the Pentagon. So this was 2016. And, honestly, at the time, I really wanted to focus organizations on the hard part of doing these programs, these vulnerability disclosure and bug bounty programs. And the real problems to solve were not, sort of the initial triage of like, is this or isn't this a bug, and kind of managing the hackers. You'd think it was, but it's not. It's actually the internal processes of fixing the bugs and learning from your mistakes. So we were focused, pretty much on organizational maturity, helping organizations understand like what are the capabilities I need to run one of these programs so that it's not, kind of like a black hole where the bug goes in and, no solution ever comes out. And are we wasting our money spending money on a bug bounty program when we could be investing earlier in the security life cycle to be able to prevent some of these bugs, right? So that's really why we founded the company and what we've been doing ever since. And since then, we've created some of the governments and large organizations. We've created some of their first vulnerability disclosure programs. We created the first formal loan disclosure program for the UK government. That was something that we did in early 2017, 2018. And now, just like the US government, they are requiring loan disclosure programs across all of the UK government. And it's become a staple of what they expect out of their own, agencies. When the pandemic hit, we were able to help Zoom out of quite a bit of a mess because they had been running two different bug bounty programs on two of the major bug bounty platform providers, and they got really popular. Well, the bug bounty programs got flooded. It was like an emergency room at the beginning of the pandemic kind of caseload was out of control. So we were able to come in, organize their back end processes and reduce, the number of open cases, so they had some breathing room, and we left them with standard operating procedures that they still use to this day, to get those bugs fixed and also learn from those mistakes. So ideally never make them again.
Do you
But
save
that's
them
really what
from
we do.
Zoom bombing?
What's that?
Did
Oh
you?
no, Zoom bombing is something else entirely, right? That's something that could still happen, obviously. If you share a Zoom link with, people that might want to join and you don't require a passcode, you could still get Zoom bombed. But no, more like security holes that were, code level holes that a real attacker might a criminal attacker might take advantage of to take over your system or take over your camera or microphone, those kinds of things.
And what is it like being in charge of people in your organization day to day? What do you think about as a leader?
Well, I like to think of myself as a hacker of capitalism. And by that, I mean that I don't run my company the way that, we are all told that, in order to make profits, you need, especially at a startup, you need to work, around the clock, and the team has to wear so many hats that they're overwhelmed all the time. And this is just the grind. This is what to expect. Also, the myth that you underpay people at a startup because you're just starting out. So can't afford to pay them, as much as market rates. We don't do that here at Luta Security. We pay market rates, and we also a few years back started doing 32-hour 4-day work weeks with every Friday as paid time off for the full-time employees. We also give 2 weeks off paid in the summer and 2 weeks off paid in the winter. We call them Luta Siesta Fiestas. And so we basically, along with those and all the federal holidays and everything, we give people 79 paid days off a year when they become full-time employees at Luta. And you'll never guess, as soon as we started doing this, we became more profitable, not less. So I look at this as an experiment in capitalism. Um, and the fact that you can have an ethically run company that doesn't exploit its workers. And that's, it's not just pay equity that I care about, it's worker rights and, not exploiting workers in the name of profit.
So right now, would you consider yourself still a startup? Are you growing into a small enterprise? What would be the right size for Luta?
I would say that if Uber is still allowed to call itself a startup at 15 years in and reporting its very first profits, we are absolutely still allowed to call ourselves a startup. We are a growing startup, bootstrapped, profitable, organic, and non-exploitative. So yeah, I would say we're just, a growing company, a growing small business.
Is acquisition or merger part of the possible future for Luta?
Well, we almost acquired another company, so that's, there's that. We almost acquired another company. Um, I think, when I think about it, if we were ever to be offered an acquisition deal where we would be acquired, one, it would be really important for the cultural elements that I mentioned to be maintained, and not just as an island, but actually in the would-be parent company. And I think that there's a lot to be said about the fact that study after study shows that productivity does increase when you move to a 4-day, 32-hour work week. Not a 4-day, 40-hour work week, a 4-day, 32-hour work week. So that would be, one of the key things that I would look for. But the other thing is, I think that um, I think that it's hard in this environment because the measures of success of a lot of companies are counter to what you would think, should measure business success. I mentioned Uber, right? Uber is considered a very successful company that has literally taken 15 years to have its first profitable quarter. That is so strange to me. Oh, we're being joined by a cat. I knew this would happen. This is this is
Hello.
this is Selkie, and he's a star, but he's been joining me like this on every call I've had. So treat for your audience is that you get to
Yes,
see this
there
guy.
we go.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about Silky.
So Selkie that's a Scottish name for seal. He looks like a little
Oh.
baby seal, and he is a baby, and he's about to drool in my freshly done hair. I just know it. But I got him and his brother from another mother. They were two different litters, but they were the last of their litters. We adopted them back in February. And that was after, back in December, we lost our 18-year-old cat, Scappy, who
Okay.
was named after a Python fuzzing tool, for all of the nerds who happen to be watching this. But Scappy was with us for 17 of his 18 years. He was also an adopted rescue cat. And we rescued these two. And the other one is more shy, definitely more camera. I told you he's going to drool in my hair.
He likes
Um,
your hair.
he does, but this guy is a lover and a fighter. And as you can see, he is very shiny, hence his name that means seal, because he is like shiny like a baby seal. And the other one is called Mochi, and he's shy but plays fetch. So
I'm
there you
guessing that's
have it.
named after a Japanese dessert.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, we were really enjoying like eating mochi, and when we got that cat, he just was cute and tiny, like a little. He was very small. He was the smallest kitten at the shelter, and so he just seemed like a little bite-sized kitten, Mochi.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
So, going back to Luta and thinking about succession, is it too early to think about what succession leadership is a tongue twister? Leadership succession looks like for you?
Well, honestly, I think there are configurations of this business where I can continue to lead it and work at it, that aren't as demanding for me in particular. And because we have the freedom of not having shareholders, we have no investors, I am the sole owner. It really is something where, I can take the company whatever direction I want and, at whatever speed I want. And I'm not really forced with these external pressures, to, for example, maximize profits for the board type of thing. Hence, I have the freedom to pay market rates and give 79 days of paid vacation to the full-time employees. Um, I think I don't know. I think, obviously, if I ever were to turn the reins over to anyone, whether it's one of my children when they're an adult or anybody else, I would want them to maintain these core company values of workers' rights because, you know, I think you know that I named the law lab after my late mother.
Yes.
We didn't always get along, two strong-willed women in the same house, go figure. But, I moved out on my 17th birthday, and there was a time when I was a teenager where I kind of phased in and out of homelessness. This
Mhm.
wasn't her fault. This was literally just that I was finding my way in the world. And so from going from homeless to, a business owner in such a long and winding journey, I would want someone who would really value human beings over profits because to me, I have the same value when I was homeless and waiting tables in, an early job that I do now as the CEO of this company. I have the same value as a human being. It's not my work that defines my value. So
When when would you say that turning point came in your life then? actually led to you getting into your industry, but really off the streets?
Well, I mean, honestly, that was a temporary situation. I was privileged in that I already had a good education from one of the best public school systems in the country. Arlington, Massachusetts is in the shadow of MIT and Harvard.
Mhm.
There were a lot of MIT and Harvard grads and all the universities around there who were parents that were very active in the public school system. We had two different computer labs. AP computer science was taught at my high school. We had a computer team.
Mhm.
So one, I came from privilege even though I was, down and out at that moment. And I want to really emphasize that it's like the quality of the free education that I
Mhm.
had was spectacular. I mean, people that I talk to today often they don't have that same level of education available to them today, right? The second is that I did really well in school despite, having troubles at home. And so I was able to get into college. I didn't finish college, but I was able to get into college and I double majored in, molecular biology and mathematics before kind of getting diverted back into the computing world. And in my mind, I kept thinking, well, I'm just going to figure this out and I'll go back. Well, I never went back until I was on that commencement stage, last week, where I finally got to wear robes for the first time. And that was a big deal for me. Okay, this is the part where he thinks that I am a pirate and he is a parrot. So he's climbing this. But I would say that there wasn't one single turning point. It was always where I always had ambition. I That part never faltered for me. It was just a matter of the details of execution, and I think it was, honestly the grit that got me through everything, the determination to change the world.
And where did you learn that from? Or who?
I learned it from my mother. Definitely learned it from my mother. I mean, the fact that there we go. The fact that she came from such a tiny place in the middle of nowhere, pretty much. It takes 37 hours door to door to get to her island, which by the way, if viewers hadn't picked up, Luta is the nickname of the island where my mom was born. The actual island name is Rhoda, but Luta has been its nickname for since Japanese occupation at one point. And so who I learned that from, was my mom. And, you know, I I love both sides of my parental heritage, and I love obviously the fact that I was born and raised in America. So, this is one of those only in America stories. But my dad was an entrepreneur. He was a jeweler. He was owned his own business. And I take from that, the pieces that I feel like have helped me weather, this male dominated industry with no funding and whatnot, and still being able to not just compete but win in this, in this competitive market. um so really I think, both sides of my upbringing contributed to this, and also this guy and this having love in my life, having my kids and wanting to, my parents both passed away independently in 2011. So really wanting to impress my children is a big motivator for me.
Future is always important.
Mhm.
Uh, Tell us about what is the most important leadership lesson you'd like to share with our viewers?
Ooh, leadership lesson. So one thing that I usually speak to is the fact that you'll get a lot of leadership tips from leaders that look like leaders of the past. What works for a white male is not necessarily going to work for a different gender, different race. When you are an underrepresented person, the world plays by different rules, and you have to also. So I think, we'd all been given career advice early in our careers saying just work hard and the promotions will come. Well, they don't for women and people of color. So you have to do other things, in your career to manage your career, given that the parameters are different. It's like the variables are different in the equation. Um, so I would say pay attention to what your goals are and actively work towards those goals. Don't make the mistake that I did early in my career of thinking I needed to stay at an organization to finish a certain project or whatnot. It wasn't going to take my career any further. It was just, something that I thought professionalism, said that I needed to stay a certain length of time or stay to finish this project or stay to not let down the team, etc. Be more careerist, especially if you are a historically underrepresented person. And I don't
Thanks.
mean step on people, I mean step up, and step up for yourself.
Thank you. Final question. Work-life harmony. I used the word work-life balance before, and people say, no, it's not about balance, it's about harmony. But take it however you like. What does that look like?
Well, I am a neuroatypical person, or as some people like to say, neurospicy. And for me, I need a lot of space and time to reflect. So that 4-day work week I was talking about, that's for me as well as anybody else at the company. I need the space. It allows me to bring my best self to work when I am at work. And it allows me, that it's like an assurance that I will have the space I need to you know re replenish my internal well of strength and everything, but also that I will have um you know focus for the work that needs to be done. And I think that is a big part of the increase in productivity, is respecting that my time at work is I can leave my work at work, and he's in the hair, and respecting my off time. And I defend it very, very vehemently. You'll ask any of my employees, when they sort of detox from usual corporate culture, they come into my organization and they'll send me a quick email after hours or send me a really quick thought and email on the weekend. And what I usually do is I will draft a reply and I will send it to them first thing in the morning on the workday, the first workday back. And I'll remind them to just hold those thoughts, do what I just did, which was draft a reply, get it off your, sort of mental to-do list, but do not send it unless it's an emergency, until working hours, and it takes a few instances. But yeah, I would say it's respecting that barrier between work and what's really important. Why do we work? We work, so that we can support ourselves and our loved ones and these cats, and everything. But it should not be the thing that defines us.
Thank you. We started talking about leadership, but I hope that our viewers also pick up something about how organizations and work culture should look like.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that if I had my way, I would see that, one, that there'd be universal basic income so that workers would be much freer to choose organizations that are supportive of them, and two, that organizations start doing what we're doing, which is hiring enough people that a 4-day 32-hour work week is manageable and doesn't affect the business, but does very much affect the well-being of everybody who works there in a positive way.
Think we can say amen to that. And it just leaves me to thank you, Katie, for joining us today on this episode of Profiles in Leadership. My very best to Luta and all the amazing work that you do. And
Thank
Selkie, very
Yeah,
glad that Selkie could join us too.
right?
Thank
It's
you.
an unexpected treat. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.